Hello everyone, welcome. It is Tuesday again. It's that time of year, or time of month. We're going to be editing again. So for the next hour, just like normal, live, we're going to be editing in that program, Capture One. We're going to be taking your images, running them through Capture One, and then hopefully popping something better out the other side. So welcome, Your Royal Highness, if you're watching. We'll cover that in a second. However, Capture One is the piece of software that is written by the guys out in Denmark, in Copenhagen, and it's a raw processor that allows us to take the image that your camera sensor records as a raw file, edit it, mix it up a bit. By the way, you don't actually have to use raw files. You can use other tools or other file formats within Capture One. It's just you're going to get the most out of it if you have the raw data. But we edit it, mix it up a bit, fix anything that's wrong, process it, and hopefully get it looking like what you saw at the time, which is one of the biggest challenges people have with their cameras. So out the end of that becomes normally what we export is a TIFF file, but a JPEG or whatever for you to share on social media or print. Yes, please print. But for others to enjoy. That's the idea. So for the next hour, we're going to spend our time in that program, that one there, and we're going to be taking your images and putting them through the process, and we'll try and cover as much as we can as we go along the way. For those of you that want access to submit your images into here, if there's anyone in, I don't know, Kensington area, upload to this file site, or this file sharing site here, paulreeferlive.wetransfer.com. Send the raw file in. Let me know what the issue is, or what you're struggling with, or what you'd like to know more about, and we'll try and cover it in one of these sessions. So let's get on to today's session. Where are we? Michael, no knighthood for you. Probably not. It was probably not in the running anyway. But we'll talk about that in a second, because actually, believe it or not, my view is somewhat different probably to what a lot of people's is at the moment. Tim, you've just asked a question about we're preparing a masterclass. Yes, we will. So I mentioned last time we're going to prepare a session specifically on negative management. So when you scan in negatives, whether it's film, slides, anything like that, and the tricks that we can use within Capture One, there is a version of Capture One which is specifically designed for basically negatives. It's called Cultural Heritage. It has the functionality within. It's a more expensive version of Capture One, so there are ways of treating those files differently in normal Capture One and still getting good output. So we'll try and run that over the next few weeks. But if any of you have got files that you want to be included in that, do send any scans in and we'll see what we can do. Okay, so let's get into the actual version of Capture One, which is 16.3.7. So for those of you that do not have Capture One at all, go to capture1.com, go to, I think, the download button on the top right, or start free trial or something like that. You've got 30 days free usage of it, full program. There's no limitations, no credit card needed, no nothing. You just go for it. And that gets you a month's worth of usage. And then from that point, you can do as some people have, which is buy a perpetual license. The perpetual license means you keep that version that you buy. It does not entitle you to future upgrades. In that case, you'd have to pay to upgrade it to a newer version. You get discounts, but it is a paid upgrade in future. Or you subscribe, and there's two versions. You've got Capture One, and you've got something called All-in-One, both of which give you access to the latest version at any time, and that there being the latest one. So if you are on subscription, or if you're downloading trials to have a play, make sure you're on the very latest version, which is what we're using today. So let's talk about editing. I find it interesting, the uproar, especially from the British press of all people, about the fact that photos have been edited, bearing in mind some of the questionable behaviour of the British press over not too distant history, actually. Now, there is a difference, and one of the things that I think a lot of people have missed in all of the fun and games that have been going on over the last couple of days is that there is a different standard to which we hold a press image from a piece of artwork or a piece of fine art print or anything around that, something that can be interpretive. If it's a press image, the challenge is that it has to have effectively no manipulation. You can probably change colors, you can probably fix a little bit of overexposure and so on, But the rules of engagement, as it were, are you are not meant to manipulate any picture. And that's where this has gone a little bit as a big story. Honestly, it must have been a slow news day yesterday, because actually the headline, person edits photo. Okay. Anyway, so what are we talking in the next hour? Well, we're talking about editing photos. So we're all doing that all the time. And here's an example. So landscape photo. I like this shot. It's great. However, in this area here, originally, was a really annoying person. And I mean really annoying. Now, I can spend my entire life getting worried about having a completely empty frame and trying to, I don't know, you could, in theory, do a 3-hour-long exposure and hope they move enough in that time. You could hide them behind a different sand dune. I mean, this place has got several options that you can do that in. Or we can rely on the fact that we know, broadly speaking, we would be able, in post-processing, to delete that person and replace it with other things. Now, to that end, is Capture One the one and only tool that you can use to do that? Absolutely not. And someone actually asked me the other day, do we use any other tools other than Capture One? Yeah, loads of them. So this isn't purely about Capture One. Unfortunately, fortunately and unfortunately, Capture One is focused on raw processing in the same way that Lightroom is, in the same way that Pro Raw is, in the same way that, what's the other one? There's a Raw Therapy or whatever. There's loads of them. They're raw processing engines. They're designed effectively like a darkroom was. So it was big changes, global changes. Now, there was a little tweak in the darkroom, which is dodging and burning, and you could literally cut out bits of film and lay it on and manipulate images. For that, we go into a pixel editor. And a pixel editor may be Photoshop. It may be, oh gosh, mind blank, Affinity. Sorry, losing track of the applications. But if you look on my system and just looking at the applications now, do we have Luminar installed? Yes, we do. Do we have DxO installed? Yes, we do. Do I have Magic Bullet Photolux? Yes, we do. Do we have Nik installed? Yes, we do. Do we use Photoshop? Yes. Do we use Affinity? Yes. Do we use Sharpen, Topaz Sharpen, Gigapixel? Yes. So there's not one tool that can fix or edit every photo in the way that you want. Some of them are for styling, some of them are for tweaking things, removing things. The remove tool in Photoshop now is exceptionally good, and most importantly, it doesn't use generative AI to do it still. It's likely that it will do, it's likely that it will move on, but at the moment it takes the content of your image and removes whatever you choose to. So those tools are great. They're best-in-class tools. Don't not use them just for the sake of this theory of being pure. You can be pure as long as you like. But as a print on a wall, I don't want a guy in a blue top and green Wellington boots on it. I want the cool view. And that's the cool view without them. So do I have a problem with someone editing a photo? Absolutely not. I think there's a challenge, which is when you read something in the newspaper, it should always be completely factually checked out and true, because that's always the case, right? But yes, there are different standards depending on the medium to which you're delivering. If you're delivering artwork as prints on a wall, in my view, it should represent reality. And if something is temporary in nature, this dude, I'm happy to remove them. If there's a piece of trash on the floor, remove them. If there's a building that's permanent, like out here, no, we can't really remove it. That's part of the scene. But for anything else, anything that's literally temporary by nature, I've got no problems with, and I don't see how a lot of people can. So, there we go. Editing in a nutshell. For those that want to look at pixel editing and stuff like that, we might have a look at that at some point in the future. We might go into another application. But today, we are going to go into Topaz Sharpen. Fun fact. Because we're going to do something with one of the images. You can guess what we're probably going to do with it, but it's a good example of where we need work to be able to fix something. So let's start off, though, before we do that, with Ken's. Sorry, Powell. I think Capture One, you can't modify hands. No, it's not very good at that. It tends to leave ghosts if you do it wrong. So let's have a look at Ken's shot. So this is a shot. There's a question in my head around. So Ken's question is, is it right? Is it enough? Is it too much? Is it, have I pushed it and whatever? If I look at the original, let's just do across here. So by the way, before and after, most valuable tool in some ways for viewing. So if you don't have the before and after thing on the top of your toolbar, go to customize toolbar and on here, drag this one up here. Or press Y on the keyboard with your finger and you can choose to have a split version or you can choose to have it the full view. But before and after gives us the raw as delivered by the base characteristics of the file, which are set in here, versus after all the edits that have been made. Great. So in fact, let's just make one other thing, by the way, because actually there is a big by the way. We talked about the version 16.3.7, I think we're at the moment. For those of you that are getting annoyed by this, because I am, just remember there is a quick fix. When you update your version, quite often your workspace is reset. Every time you update your version, the first thing that Capture One does is back up your workspace. Perfect example that, trust me, goes way, 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 way down beyond what you can see on the screen. So I'm actually using my same workspace that was in place from, I think, Capture One 15, plus a couple of other tools. Now, the first thing I would do, once you do an update to Capture One, if you see these tools reset or you're missing some or anything like that, Window, Workspace, and go to the latest version that's in that list. That was the latest version you were using. The problem with doing that, just to bear in mind, I'll give you an example. Dust removal. So that was added as a tool into the default workspace quite a few versions ago. A lot of people still don't have that tool enabled because they keep using their old workspace. So when you read the release notes, because of course everyone does, make sure that you check if there are any new tools. And if there are, by all means, apply your old workspace, but right click on any of these tools up here, go to add tool, and then you can find, for instance, dust removal and add the new tools in. Otherwise, there might be stuff in that new release you're not even seeing because you're on an old workspace. But do keep your workspaces, save them if you want. You can actually save it as a special name if you want, rather than just the version. But know that Capture One always has your latest one saved. Right. Ooh, I feel very admined out. So let's look at this picture. Does it feel right? Does it feel the right color tone? And we're going to talk about white balance a bit today. Yeah, it does compared to the original, funnily enough. So to me, when I first saw this, I thought this is very green. How do I know it feels very green? Well, A, to my eyes, it looks pretty green. But B, if ever there's a check, just zoom into an area that should be white or neutral at least, and look at the numbers at the top, red, green and blue numbers, and then your luminosity number. So these are the values from 0 up to 255, from black, solid black through to solid white on each channel. So it's not literally black to white, it's 0 red to maximum red, 0 green to maximum green, 0 blue to maximum blue. So on a grey, neutral, white, something like that, those numbers should be pretty much the same. Because you can't have one number wildly out and then the rest of them down low and then keep it neutral, because that means it's got a tint. It's either wildly blue or wildly red or wildly green. So in this case here, is it slightly green? Well, yeah. So look at those numbers, 213 red. So if this was completely perfect grey, it would be 213 red, for example, 213 green, 213 blue. Instead, it's not. It's 213, 255, 222. So that tells us there is more blue in there than red, and there's more green in there than blue. So it's not neutral. But here's the fun one. Let's go back to before. Before, it was actually too blue. So it was 223 red, bit more green, 233, than red, but a lot more blue, 244. So it was too blue. And it's been shifted to be, in my view, a bit too green. So it's not a case of there's an absolute number. Don't try and chase an absolute number. But it is a case of just looking at it with your eyes. And if you ever want to just do a quick check, the logical check or the little quick sort of math check on it, just use your mouse over something that should be neutral. And I say should be. We'll talk about that later because light changes that. Look at the numbers at the top and that will give you a clue as to where the issue lies. Nick, so by the way, let's make this interactive. Please ask questions. We'll try and cover them as they go. So, Nick, would be nice if the currently active workspace has a check mark against it so you know which one is selected. That is a very good idea. Speaking of good ideas, if you go to Capture One support page now, you will find there is a brand new feature request forum in there where you can upvote stuff and you can keep a track of things that have been approved for development or not going to be done or anything like that. So genuinely, please have a look at that. Use it. CaptureOne.com, go to support. In the forums, you'll see links to it as well. If you go onto our Facebook page, the group's Facebook page, you'll see a link in there, I think that Ray put up, which is a link directly to the new forum. But yes, good idea, Nick. It would be nice if in this little window list, this little window list, it actually had a little check mark to say this is the one that you've got active, because to be fair, I don't know. I just assume it's the last one. Where are we? JD, I finally noticed the workspace X update as a result of the last update. Yeah, it was just recreating it. Yeah, so you don't need to recreate it. It will always back up. Unfortunately, it will always back up. So you need to tidy up that list every now and then. You can remove them. But in general, it's worth read the release notes. Make sure you're not missing any new tools because they tend to be put on the new workspace. Then by all means, go back to your old one and add it in manually if you choose. Right, so back onto our white balance. Is this too green? In theory, by the numbers, yes it is. So I'm going to just clone this variant. So we right click on the picture, go to clone variant. What that does is it takes a copy of not just the raw file, but all the edits there and puts it into another container. It doesn't physically duplicate the raw file, but it creates a new little container with a new set of edits starting from the edits you've already done here. So it's a literal clone of my edits that are in there. So in here, my new one, I'm just going to flag it so that it's mine by press the minus key. You can press the plus key for green, minus for red, the star with asterisk for yellow, I think. I can't remember what the other one is because it's not a weird math one. But anyway, I only use 3. So let's have a look at our base image layer because this does have a custom white balance on it. So if I were to just see what it was before, yep, too blue. And after, a bit too green. So how would we fix that? Well, here's another one, a fun one. So if I put a little color readout on our gray here, let's pick an area that's a bit clearer there. So look at my little numbers. So color readout, click and hold down the white balance tool. You get add color readout, delete color readout. The color readouts stay on every single picture that you're editing in that position. So bear that in mind. If you're editing lots of pictures, it's designed to do that so I can keep the same position and check. But that gives us a live readout now while I'm over here doing other stuff. So with my tint, I know I need to bring down a little bit of green. So I'm going to actually shift our tint a little bit. That's looking a little bit better. Are we a little bit too blue maybe? So I'm just going to pull this up to be warmer. That's looking pretty good. And then a tiny bit more there. Now, this is not perfect. Of course it's not perfect. It's still done by eye to a certain extent, and it's still done by a very crude thing, which is a great big slider that says Kelvin from cool to warm, so the color temperature of the light, and then tint, green to magenta, which in most part helps with any filter color cast. But look at our numbers here. 209, 209, 207, 209. I could spend ages trying to get that last blue to get up to 209. But to me, that is a pretty good mix. That's got us a neutral setup. Let's go back to our original. And we've got 200, 212, 208. So there's that skew. And if we look at these two side by side from left to right, we now see the difference between something that is, in my view, correctly color balanced through to what was in the original one, too green. Now that doesn't mean that the one on the right is correct, because like I said at the very beginning of this, it depends completely on what you saw at the time. So today we're going to go through images from Ken, from Nick, from Bob, from Jed, if we get through them all, but this depends on what each of those people saw in their image. I wasn't there at the time. I wasn't looking at this view. Maybe it did look like that. Maybe it was more green. But it depends on what the purpose is. It's the same thing about the editing. If the purpose is to remind me of how it looked, then do play with it to your heart's content. Play with it to what you saw at the time. If the purpose is to print this as something that's a record of what was there, then you may want to be a little bit more accurate. But those are your choices. Even with that change, I'm just going to delete this color readout here. Let's just go to this one full screen. I can still use our color editor, our color balance tool, sorry, and I can say if I want the shadows to be more green, well, let's pick on those individually and do that. And actually, we could even pull the shadows to be a little less saturated. The midtones, we can make a little more blue. Highlights, I'm going to leave where they are. But if I do a quick before, after, so that's just with the white balance change, a bit warmer. That's with that change. It gets a little bit colder. You may not be able to see it quite on the screen. But in general terms, this has just got a little bit more earthy. Now, has anything changed up here? Not really. In fact, funnily enough, it's fixed it a bit more. So look at those numbers at the top, 196, 196, 196. That is neutral. That is neutral grey. That is a correctly, in quotes, white balanced white building. Now, of course, the building could have been beige. The building could have been slightly green. I don't know. Again, I wasn't there. But that's how we would measure the white balance through. So color readout tools are really helpful. So is your readout at the top here. If you want a permanent color readout, add one here and click on your image to choose where you want it to be. And then use your white balance to adjust to make it work. Now, the further question about what other edits, well, there's a couple things on here. One, in fact, I'm creating lots of variants, but a new variant. So this is the original photograph here, the pure original. I'm just going to quickly do a straighten of that picture. Ooh, too much. Turns out there's a hill. In fact, let's see if Auto Keystone can do it. Where are we at? Yeah-ish, I think. Right. There's a lot of, and trust me, there's a lot of tweaking in this image. In here, so there's almost every single slider touched. Not so much in the color balance, although I've added that in now. A little bit of structure, no clarity, but what we have got is a huge amount of contrast, which is making it feel very, very binary. If you're not careful, there is the other tool in Capture One, which is dehaze, which would have done a similar thing. So if I use dehaze here, and I can use a lot of it. I can, in one click, pretty much get to a similar level of contrast. Not everything else, so not color tone, not any color editing, but a little bit closer with just one click using that dehaze tool. You can do it and get, close. In fact, you can actually get better. Let me be honest. You can get better than dehaze with the individual tools. So if we use a curve, and if we use some clarity, and if we use the contrast tool, and if we use some levels, and we use some selective areas as well, you can do a better job than the dehaze tool, for sure. But the dehaze does it in one click. Those tools take a long time to get the refined version. So life's about choices and all that. Yeah, it's where you want to spend your time. Funnily enough, having seen this now, this one does actually still look like it's leaning a little bit. So it might need some further work. Powell, wouldn't the white balance picker on the building do almost the same change? Yes, it would. So let's just go on to, I'm going to undo those color changes, and I'm going to, don't know if I want to reset it, but let's reset it to there. And I go to my white balance picker, and as long as I pick on the right place, it will get it to there. I would argue that's gone a little bit too warm. Whereas here, a little bit cooler. Interesting. So, to me, personally, I tend to do it manually. That's a choice. You don't have to. Auto white balance, in answer to Ozzy's question, I very rarely use auto white balance because often it gets it wrong. Because the auto white balance is looking beyond one particular area. It's looking across more of the picture. And the problem with that, so you can see here, this is with auto white balance. Clicked. Click, 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 click. Up here, look at my numbers at the top. 218, more green, 226, more blue, 229. And it's because across that picture, Capture One has looked to try and effectively align these parts of the histogram. So they are closer than this one, which is further apart. It's a bit difficult not being able to bring them both up at the same time. but it's trying to effectively not merge them, but it's trying to get them closer so you get more grey, or more neutrality, let's call it that, than any wild swings to blue, green, red, and so on. So personally, I wouldn't use the auto white balance. I have seen it done before to get even in the rough ballpark, but A, the picker is probably your friend. B, the rest of it I would do manually here. And C, I'd put on a color readout just to check. And this is, of course, if, and it's only if you want that barn or that building to be completely white. If you didn't, there's no point. Play with it to your heart's content. On here, and again, this is personal opinion, I would want more of a lead up into that barn. So I'm going to create a new layer along here and put foreground, and I'm going to put a graduated filter up here. So a layer that starts at 100% down here, 50% where that middle mark is, and then 0% up here. So that's a very soft one. And I'm going to pull down my exposure just to lead into the path. Now, here's a little fun one. If I want the path, in fact, we can move up a little bit more. If I want that path to still be a real lead-in line, well, I can go to my eraser. Let's just turn on my mask. Nice, big, and very soft eraser. And I'm going to put a low flow on so I can paint with it. And I'm just going to, in fact, let's just do a clone of that. Loads of clones going on today. Is that the one? Yeah. So I'm just going to click here. It's going to say, do you want to rasterize the mask? In other words, I've just drawn a mathematical mask, a graduated filter with a start, a finish, and a fall off in between. I now want to paint on it. It can't do that mathematically. So the first thing I've got to do is turn it into a painted mask. At that point, I can't edit the gradient anymore. So yes to rasterize, and I'm just going to paint in this track a little bit. And if I turn on a grayscale mask, you'll see. So it's not across the whole thing completely opaque. It's a little lead in to there. And that allows me to leave that pathway as something a little bit more illuminated compared to the sides on the left and right. So we go from there to there, but I'm leaving the pathway as a line in. If I don't do that, everything is darker in the foreground. And you see the difference? Maybe this is too much. Maybe we want to back that away. So use the opacity slider on the top left. But it's just a very subtle way of getting the viewer to see that path as the lead into the image, not everything here in the front. So, where are we, Paula? I would lower contrast to get a more painterly result. Yep, you can, absolutely. So if I click and create a filled adjustment layer, I could actually pull down contrast using this. I could also do a bit of split tone, so I could say shadows I want nice and cool, highlights I want a little bit warmer. This is throwing all that white balance stuff out the window. Shadows, sorry, midtones maybe up to, oh no, we'll keep them a bit cool as well. But that gives us a very different look. So it's a low contrast look, looks a bit more dated, more vintage. Could even put a little bit of vignette, although we spend a lot of money on lenses that don't do that. So, you know, again, choices. But there's lots and lots of different ways of taking something like this that's got a leading line in and that looks old. But one of the things is to get that white balance nailed. Okay, let's move on. By the way, the reason that I'm starting to sound like a late night DJ is because I think I've got severe man flu, but we'll deal with that if that arises. So, question from Nick, which is, so as a premise, just to help Nick out here, this was handheld. I think it's 200 millimeters handheld. In Nick's own words, there are issues with the shot, and there are. It's not sharp. There's some challenges with it. But the question was, is there anything we can do with it? Because otherwise, it's a wasted shot, and the shot has some meaning for Nick. So, what can we do? So here is the original shot out here, and if I look at 100%. So that's zoomed into 100. It's already blurry at 100. Oh, sorry. Let's just get rid of Paula's thingy. And yes, Paul, I completely agree. There is no other kind of man flu other than complete and utter annihilation. So this is not in focus. Now, whether it was not in focus because of focus, maybe it was the, actually the focal point, maybe it was blur, as in movement of the camera. It's not the animal moving, because everything else is also out of focus, and I can't find the focal point if it was a focal issue. So my belief is that it was probably because it was moving in the hand. At 200 millimeters, a 6/40th of a second could have been okay, but it's not going to do great. Maybe a slightly wider aperture than f9 would have helped. Lots and lots of, if only, if only, if only. The fact is, this is the image we've got. That's the best that we're going to have out of it. So what can we do? So Nick has already done a load of changes. So in the image layer, quite a lot of clarity, quite a lot of structure. And if we look at this wolf, I think, if I'm wrong, sorry, goes from there to there. So that's pretty good already. So there we go. Nick's on. Yeah, excitement at seeing a wolf with no tripod handy. Yeah, also excitement at seeing a wolf at a safe distance with a river in between you and it. Great. Let's look at what our other options are. So here is our version that Nick's edited. Going back, funnily enough, actually, to white balance, here is another version, and here is another version. And all of them got different colors, different color profiles, some in the color editor, some in the color balance tool, like this one, where it's taken highlights to be orange, midtones to be orange, but left the shadows as they are. This one here has got a cooler feel to it. So there's lots and lots of different ways, but let's take this one. This one was green flagged, as it were, so we'll take it as red that was the one that was targeted. I would argue, and again, look at those numbers up top, I would argue this is a little bit too blue. So personally, I would probably bring up this white balance a little bit there to get it more neutral. Not much, but just there. I'll leave it a little bit blue, but I don't want it so blue that it's obviously too blue. So maybe there. Okay, I'm going to clone this one so that we don't obliterate any of the previous changes other than that white balance one. So we can add a load more structure. Now, obviously this applies to the whole image. We can do it selectively. You can choose an area and do it selectively. You can, paint in on the tree, paint in on the wolf. And if it was the wolf that was moving and not the camera, that's exactly what I'd do. But because it's the whole image, that's a challenge. If you're doing sharpening, make sure you are at 100% or more. Now, obviously, when you go to 200%, 300%, things start distorting. You start getting pixelation. You start getting artifacts. So if you've got the screen real estate to do it and a decent enough resolution, then do it at 100%, because Capture One is then using the raw file, not the preview, to be able to show you what it's doing. Quite a lot of people do it zoomed out. You are not seeing the true representation of how much sharpening you're doing, how much noise reduction you're doing, and how much single pixel removal you're doing. So this slider here for noise, these sliders for noise again, and this slider work really well at 100%. They don't work very well when you're zoomed out. So if I were to do some sharpening, and for the sake of video, I'm going to do it at 200% so it's a bit clearer. Sharpening. I want to sharpen this by quite a lot more. So I'm going to whack up my sharpening slider. Great. The problem is I've now started to get some artifacts around it. It doesn't look too nice. So I'm going to reduce the radius. Now the radius is the difference that from a line or an edge that Capture One is allowed to go when it's adding in sharpness. And be under no illusions, this isn't a magic sharpening tool. It's adding sharpness by creating contrast lines. So it's seeing this dark line here and it's darkening it at a very fine level. And the radius determines how far away from that line it's allowed to play, basically. If you want to know more about sharpening, as in that tool, go to that thing. So the pro tip section we've got on the YouTube channel, it will cover sharpening in detail about this tool, as well as clarity and structure and what they do. But lots of sharpening, great, but I want to reduce the radius. So 0.6, 0.5, something like that. That gets me a load of sharpening, but only half a pixel away from any line. If I put this radius right up, look at the difference. It's horrible. So we can put our sharpening way up. 600, 700, great. If my radius allows Capture One to do loads and loads of stuff spread out from those edges, you get these things called halos. Then people say, magic, there's a halo suppression tool. So I can use that tool to fix the haloing. But you can see it really doesn't. It still looks really artificial. So you can use halo suppression as an emergency use, but ideally keep this radius nice and small. Now that does mean it doesn't feel quite as sharp. Oh well. So threshold. At what point does Capture One kick in its sharpening? So it's looking for edges, it's looking for contrast, it's looking for differences that it can sharpen. So the higher up the threshold I go, the more difference it needs to see before it even starts loading in this amount of sharpening at that radius. Lower the threshold, let's go to 0. It doesn't need anything. It's just going to sharpen anything it sees with any difference. But as you can see in here, and I'm hoping you can see, but if not, let's just really zoom in. What it's also sharpening then is noise. Because there's no threshold. There's nothing to tell Capture One, look, if you only see, if it's a pixel wide, it's not actually quite in the pixel world, but if it's only this wide as a point of texture in noise, ignore it. Only go for the actual structures and patterns and shapes that are really important. So those 3 tools or sliders dictate how much sharpening to apply, how far away from an edge you're allowed to go to sharpen, and at what point you can start sharpening, bearing in mind you don't want to introduce too much noise. And if I go to without, that's without, and that's with, you can see it has sharpened it a decent amount. Not bad. But it's not great, is it? So let's have a look at a different way of doing it. And this is where it's going to be very conscious or very contentious. If you've got a picture that you need to rescue being the keyword, and that is an example here, I wouldn't plan on doing it with Capture One at this level. For minor sharpening, for keeping things really, really pure and nice and clean, Capture One does a great job of sharpening. But at this point here, we really need an external tool. And for that, I'd probably look at Topaz. So I can do a round trip. So I'm going to go to Edit With. In fact, let's just get rid of my viewer so you can see all of this. So Edit With, warning for anyone with any weird epilepsy type behavior. For some reason, my sharpen tool has started flashing at me on the screen and I wasn't expecting it. So you've got in here Topaz Sharpen if you have it installed. Of course, if you don't, you can always add another app by going to Other and add it in. But I'm going to go to Topaz Sharpen and we're going to say I want Topaz specifically to receive a TIFF file. Best quality, 16-bit, largest range. Not compressed, using the Adobe RGB color space. 300 dpi kind of doesn't matter nowadays in terms of digital use, but 100%. So in other words, no change to any resolution, nothing like that. And edit the variant. It is going to create this TIFF, which it just has, in my catalog. Great. And it's going to send it to Topaz, I hope. Ooh, yeah, with all the flashing. But it has sent it to Topaz. So apologies if this flashes. Hopefully it's not too bad. Right. And Topaz, I'm just going to do it quickly so that we don't have to look at it for too long. I'm going to put remove blur up quite a bit, suppress noise up quite a bit, and hit apply. I chose this too soft, very blurry model. Interestingly, oh no, you are seeing a flash. Not always though. I see a lot more flashing. Anyway, hit apply. It's going to process that, going to get that away from the screen so you don't have to put up with it. And it's going to update this TIFF, most important. So by doing it as Edit With, it's taken our adjustments, sent them to Topaz. Topaz has done its stuff, and it sent them back all in that catalog. I don't have to export it and reopen it in Topaz. I don't have to do anything like that because I used Edit With. Same with Open With, but that doesn't apply any of your other adjustments. So Open With would have effectively sent the raw across or would have sent it with no adjustments regardless of what I've made. But here's the cool bit. And don't get me wrong, I'm not a fan of a lot of the Topaz products for lots of different reasons. But when it comes to, as I say, rescuing shots, this is Capture One. This is what Topaz has come out with. So if I go into Capture One and recreate that sharpening, you know, we can get pretty good out of Capture One. Don't get me wrong. That's not bad. Bearing in mind our original to new, you know, that on the right has done a really, really good job. Let's just zoom into both of them. So I'm, again, being unfair, we're going into 200%, but it's so that you can see it really clearly on screen. So the original on the right without any adjustments. Then we got the sharpened version in Capture One on the right, but then we got the sharpened version in Topaz. Now, if I'm being really picky, there are issues with the Topaz version. It's not quite right. There are artifacts that it involves. It brings in extra little shapes and extra little edges and extra little contrast points. But in a case of rescuing an image, I'd say that's done a really good job. And if I look over here at that tree, keep having to readjust this. Let's just zoom out here. So it's done a better job than really heavy sharpening in Capture One could have done. So, yeah, A, do we edit photographs? Of course we do. That's why you're here, to discuss editing. B, do we use tools other than Capture One? Of course we do. Because Capture One doesn't do everything. It doesn't fix sleeves on cardigans, and it doesn't fix the blurriness of a wolf that was captured from a moving car because you just happened to see it, or whatever the scenario was. But this is about using the right tool for the right job. Would I use another tool to do all the base edits? Absolutely not. So I would do all my color edits. I would do all of my corrections. I would do all of my tweaks and masks. And I get frustrated in pixel editors that I can't do like a simple Luma range and then change or do a quick color editor with it without going through 20 different steps. But in the case like this, if you want to rescue that shot, there's possibly better tools out there than just your raw processor. Paul, when in the process do you advise to edit with another tool? At the end, generally. Unless you're going through something like DxO to do noise reduction or something like that. So there are cases where you're using another program because it has a specific feature that you want to then use within Capture One. The problem is Capture One's going to want the raw version of the file, the raw file. That's typically, from an interchangeable point of view, that's typically going to be a DNG that all of these programs are able to interpret the same. In theory, sometimes they don't. But that DNG is, you're starting to move away from the original raw. You've now got an interpretation into a digital negative. Then you've got an interpretation from the other program that comes back as a DNG that the other program has written for you. Sometimes Capture One views that differently to a DNG that it creates. So personally, I would try and do that as one of the final steps. At the point that I'm putting it out to an external editor, I'm assuming that we are now dealing with the flat raw or the flat finished edited file. We're not going to come back in and do any raw work. So maybe I come back in and do some cropping. Maybe I come back in and do some other stuff. But I absolutely wouldn't go out to something so early that I'm then reducing the amount of tools that I have available to me. For instance, on this TIFF file, you'll see as your white balance, it is set at 5,000 and zero tint. It's, yes, you can play with it, but it's not going to be the same as playing with your white balance and tint in the raw file. If you're using high dynamic range, well, the raw file had all this extra stuff that your camera recorded beyond 255 and beyond 0 in JPEG terms on the raw file. Well, once you set that down as a TIFF or a JPEG or anything else, you've lost all of that extra data. So when you try and pull things in, you can't do it. So personally, I would absolutely do it as last or as late as possible in the process. But yeah, I wouldn't be an editing snob about using pixel editors or other tools. If it's the right tool and it digs you out of that hole, great. Right, Bob. Bob's concerned that he edits this, or he's edited this too much, doesn't know when to stop, I think was the phrase. I think this is a really nice crop. I think it's a lovely way of doing this wider picture. In fact, let's just do here is the wider picture. So the temptation that we all have as, as a landscape photographer is we always see things wide typically. Then when you start to talk to nature photographers, as we refer to them sometimes, if they're not shooting squirrels holding on to nuts on a tree, they are shooting close, tight up vignettes of a landscape. So they're not looking at necessarily the big picture, they're looking at the tight stuff. my first thing that I would say is if you wanted this shot, use a longer lens. The problem is obviously sometimes we don't see that until we get back. So of course that's what cropping is for. It's also hopefully what wide or bigger sensors are for. Let me just, yeah. So it's presumably it's a GFX 100. Yeah. So it's a 100 megapixel shot. We've got the room to crop. I would argue that maybe using a longer lens, 70 or something like that, would have given a better result for what you wanted. But at 100 meg, you've got enough pixels to be able to get away with that crop. So pretty heavy crop, but it works. The only bit in there that doesn't work to my mind, Bob, is this up here. So again, I'm going to do before and after. So the Y key. This as a tone looks quite natural. So you've got a dark tone down here, and then it slowly goes up into the reflection. The reflection is obviously of the light up here. Oops, sorry. Of the light up here. And what's happened in the edit is you've got this upper right mask, effectively, which has pulled down brightness. And it's got a custom white balance on there. And was there something else on there? Was it saturation or something? Yeah, there's a saturation of 5. So it's increased saturation. So I don't think you need it, to be honest. I don't think you need necessarily the brightness thing, and I don't think you need the saturation thing. If I took that away, this is too bright. I understand that. But then I'd be in a different place, which is what if create a new layer, graduated filter. We're going to start from up here, go really, really long. So we've got a really soft filter. Press M on your keyboard. Remember to get your mask appear and not appear. Nick, honestly, where's my commission? He's gone off to buy Topaz. Fine, come back. So you've got a big gradient, because that big gradient means it's a really soft transition to go from the 100% mark to the 0% mark, effectively. And with that, I'm not going to use any of what you'd expect the normal tools. I'm going to use dehaze, but I'm going to use it to add haze. So I'm going to put dehaze down to the left, and I can choose a haze color I want to add, and I want to add more of this sort of darker blue, not the pinky stuff, this stuff here. Oh no, maybe we want to go up here and shadow it, but let's just, let me click, thank you. So where do we want to go? Maybe down to there, maybe down to there. Okay, so already with rehaze, so not dehaze. Dehaze makes things clearer. Rehaze has made things foggier. So I wanted to add some fog. Great. But now I can go into my exposure, not brightness, so exposure, and just darken that down. And interestingly, what Bob had done originally was add saturation because it looked a little bit washed out because it was white, it was too bright, and so on. Well, what if I decrease saturation and shift that white balance to be slightly blue and slightly more pink? I get to there. Now, it doesn't mean that this is wrong, that original one. In fact, let me just, sorry, I should have done that. Clone it. Always clone your stuff, because then you can always go back to it. So this is the original from Bob, and this is my change on it. So original and my change. With this one, I've still got the ability in the image layer to actually add, funnily enough, a bit of clarity, a bit more than was already there. But I'm not affecting up here. In fact, I could put another layer on the top if I wanted. Again, quite soft. And pull down that exposure a bit more. I don't want it to be quite so yellow, so we're going to blue it a bit more as well. Pink a bit more. It's looking pretty good. Pull down the highlights to flatten it. So I go from there, and now you see my blue issue, to there. This feels like a calmer shot. If I were to create a new filled layer, I could now go into my levels or my curve and pull up to get a bit more contrast in. So let's go to maybe there. And I would say that's a safer, more calming print than this version here. And ironically, it's probably closer to the tones that were in the original. But to me, Nothing wrong with this as a crop. Nothing wrong with that image. You know, it's nice and sharp. We've got all the detail in here. There's a personal choice here about all the bubbles. I'm not suggesting you get rid of all the bubbles. That would be quite some time. Dust removal will not do that. But this addition of this extra color line up here, to me, is quite jarring. It doesn't really fit with that scene. And actually, if I go back to the original, which is always worth doing, it sort of makes sense. But again, use before and after. Have I moved too far from that original here? And it feels like I have. Whereas here, yes, it's moved from the original, but we haven't moved quite so far away. All we've done is just dull it down. And for me, that one on the left, as I say, as a nice print on a wall that's quite chilled and quite calming and quite serene. That works. This one, I want to question where that came from. Maybe you could argue it was a reflection of the sky because there was a great big blue band in the sky up above, but I can't see that in the image, so it doesn't really make sense. Polar, where are we? Slightly wider crop, maybe. Maybe. So one of the other options that Bob sent in was actually a wider crop here. So we can, let's just go on to here, and at the moment, I think this is a 4x3. If we went 2x3, you could get away with that. And introducing even this stuff down here, although the stuff on the very edge is a little bit messy, so I'm just going to come in there. I don't want that bit down there in there. So you could get to there. Would I heal that one out? I don't know, maybe. But it's in this version, so. But yes, you could go for a wider crop. We'd need to fix some stuff up here. You've got a load of it. Maybe why that wasn't included. But maybe if we just come down a bit, then let's keep that in just like the original. Yeah, it could work. I don't mind either, to be honest. This is probably a bit more finished on the left-hand side. This feels quite abrupt in comparison. But what they don't have is this distraction up here. So in answer to your question, Bob, has it been edited too much? No, it hasn't, in my view. I think it's fine, but the one edit that's there that's questionable is adding in that color that I don't think you necessarily need. This line here is just a bit too distracting. Here it is gone, and there is, as Paula says, a wider crop. Kind of nice. I'm not sure what I'd do with this one down here. Maybe leave it in. It's okay. Right. So last one, fun one on white balance, just because we've covered that quite a lot today in color. Jed's shot. So for those people that don't know where that is, it's a little town called Lofoten, which is basically toy town for photographers. None of these red fishermen's huts, by the way, are fishermen's huts. They are all effectively Airbnb with one company that leased them out. So yeah, fun. But for everyone that has photographed the fishermen's huts, it is an iconic place. It's very cool. It is, when you're stood up on that bridge, it is stunning, but you will not be alone. You will be with another 30 people that are also stood up there freezing. Now, this view is stunning, but it's also in the cold. So this is where white balance can be a bit of a challenge. Out of interest, I'm not going to show you yet, but what do you think the native white balance is on this shot? So remember, daylight's 5500. Warm light sort of 3200. Cold, shady or whatever might go to 6500, maybe 7000, something like that. What do we think the white balance is on this shot? For those of you that want to play the white balance as it is now and the white balance that it was originally. I'm not going to show you the before and after until we get some views. So Jim's up to 6000. Any advance on 6? Oh, we could do this as an auction. Anyway, let's see what people think. In this shot, there's no color balance changing. Oh, I might have I've ruined it. For those of you that were quick enough, you might have seen. Anyway, in this shot, there's no color balance. There is a level stretch. You can see that. It's quite significant here. So it's pulling what was at 160. It's quite a dark shot all the way up. You could argue that you could expose it further to the right. The challenge here is at 3 minutes long as an exposure and at ISO 320, so you're already pushing the realms of what you can get away with on a not particularly solid bridge. So Would I push it to be even brighter by going to a higher ISO? Probably not. By going to a longer exposure? Probably not. f8's about the right aperture for this, so I wouldn't go anymore. Yes, and as Ole just said, yeah, 11,000. So the output white balance on this to get this shot is 11,457, which is a ridiculous white balance, but it works. So nowhere would you see on any chart that it was at 11,000 for any scenario in the real world. The problem is, if I look at the original, it was really, really blue. And how blue? Well, at 7,600, that was the native white balance. So to warm it up, to get it even close to white, and here's my challenge with this. That snow at this point in time in the daytime isn't that blue. The light feels blue. The light feels cold. Should the snow be completely white? No, it shouldn't. Should it be completely blue? No, it shouldn't. It should be somewhere in between. But you can tweak this. So this is one version here that says, right, well, actually, by pushing it way, way up, so increasing it to 11,500, ooh, that may be a bit of a stretch. So I'd be in a place where something like here is probably, I mean, we're still at 10,000. We're still at 10,000 Kelvin. So you still have to move that white balance shift all the way up to get this to almost neutral. It's still not neutral. So look at these numbers up here, 218, so red, a bit more green, 225, a bit more blue, 234. At 10,600, it's still bluer than white. So genuinely, I'd encourage everyone, all of you, yes, absolutely, look at the numbers, play with the white balance left and right, try and get somewhere, but do it by eye. Does this look right? No, it doesn't. It looks way too cold. In fact, your eyes would have adjusted for this when you're taking the picture. So no one sees the world in that blue. Our eyes are auto white balance, effectively. So the fact that we know that these sheds are red means that we're actually correcting that. Not the eyes, but the brain is. We're correcting stuff to see it in a more natural way to what we're expecting. The camera can't do that. It's got auto white balance, but it's not automatically correcting everything. The raw file, we've got that full flex. We can go left and right. We can make it cooler. Don't do that. So I'd be in a place where somewhere in between these two is probably right. There's some difference with the contrast and the mountain in the background, but I wouldn't be in a place where I'd want to see the image looking like this. I do want to see those cabins being red. They are red. This was either sunrise or sunset. I'm not sure which. But there was colour in the sky, clearly up here. That's not been added in. It's not been painted in. So there's colour in the sky. There's the same colour. These are the same shot, by the way. They're just 3 different edits. So this is about how you tweak, how you add gradients on to control the sky, to control the top part of this image. This one's got more contrast on the top. This one's got less. This could be an AI mask on here. Mountains. Yep. This one here is probably, oh, interesting. So there isn't one on here. That's interesting. So it's just the fact that there isn't a mountain layer, which means that this hasn't been tweaked, whereas this one has. And if I go to our original, we get to there, so stronger mountains, but way too blue sky. So even if I went to the original and went to sort of here to try and neutralize it, I now want to bring in a little bit of color up here. I want to bring in a little bit of contrast. I could do that with a really simple gradient. So let's pull back our highlights. Maybe we want to change the color in the sky a little bit. Not too much like that, but maybe to there. Mountains themselves, create a new layer, AI brush. Hopefully, yeah, we got that one, and 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 that one. I'm just clicking on these areas. Remember with AI brush, the most important thing to do once you've got the general shape like that is to refine it so that Capture One's got the ability to smooth out the edges, to improve them, to make it look a little more subtle. Because then, with my mask, and Refine, remember, has moved up to a new button there, I can now add contrast in and even go into clarity down there. I could then go back to my image layer and go back to that issue with the levels, so we could pull this brighter. You know, there's a million different ways of cutting this one, but you see the importance of that white balance. The feel, the mood of that shot changes completely from top left to, which is very, very strong, hard mountain, you know, high contrast. Top right, softer, the mountain's in soft contrast up here. Bottom left, you've still got that coolness on there, but there's a little bit of color in the sky. I'd probably delete maybe the mask over the mountain, because it's made that mountain a little bit pink. Don't like that. And then the bottom right, completely cool. This is all just white balance. All we've changed in those three images, effectively, there's obviously some little tweaks in there that Jed's already got on there, but all we're changing is the white balance to see those different moods, and they feel and look completely different. And it's why white balance is so important. So if we look at that one, we go back to this one with Bob's, you know, this wasn't purely white balance, but actually there's an element of it to try and keep those color tones the same. This one here, absolutely get out to an external editor. Someone's just mentioned, Tim and Nick have been having a conversation. Apparently Topaz now forces you or leads you to Photo AI. I don't like Photo AI. I'm going to say it now. I think the individual tools, some of them are great, some of them not so good. I don't like the bundling because it tries to do too much. But see if you can get hold of Sharpen somehow through their site as a plugin. But to be honest, Nick, I'll send this one back to you anyway with the sharpening done on it. But again, it's white balance too. It's not just about the sharpness, it's also about the feel. And Ken, in this shot here, you know, it's a choice. You can stick with this. I'd say it's a little bit too vibrant, a bit too rich, a bit too contrasty. This feels a bit more real, but most importantly, try and shift away from that slightly green tint if you can on the neutral parts. Use green wherever you like elsewhere, but on the bits that feel like they should be neutral, try and get them back there. Okay, so that's it for today. Sorry, or well done, you made it through. If you want to send images in for next one, so the next one will be next month, the beginning of April. Keep an eye on our website under workshops. You'll see a live editing session on there that gives you the date and time that it's going to be. Or on the YouTube thingy, if you hit the bell thingy, that gives you a reminder. Or on the Facebook group, that one there, that will tell you everything that you need to know about the next sessions. And we normally give people a bit of a heads up. But do send in your files. We'll see how many we can get through next time. And we'll try and cover maybe something different to just the white balance stuff. If you want to learn about specific stuff, especially things like color grading, that's all in that lot there. So you can go to the description in this video and get to those masterclasses and watch them to your heart's content. But between now and next month, look after yourselves and we'll see you then. Cheers. Bye.